Hey guys, Chris here with the Good Old Gamer. So today AMD officially announces the Radeon RX 5500 series. Okay, so that was not unexpected. We were expecting this announcement here today. However, according to video cards, they didn't give a whole lot of details in this particular announcement. So they didn't even mention the RX 5500 XT. Essentially, they really only talked about the 5500, and I don't see any information really about the 5500M here either. So what that means to us is we can really only talk about the RX 5500. It's really the only thing that we have any information on. So this is obviously a mid-range graphics card, and throughout the presentation, AMD compared its new graphics card to the RX 480 and GeForce GTX 1650. So these, I don't know if you'd really consider them mid-range anymore. They're more like entry-level at this point, but still kind of mid-range. I mean, they can game at 1080p, so I guess that is still mid-range. So the 5500 is obviously meant to compete with these cards right here. The 5500 series will be the first mid-range card to feature GDDR6. A combination of 8GB of GDDR6 on a 128-bit bus has never been used before. That's not really that crazy. Bandwidth is just short of the RX 580s. So that kind of makes sense if it's kind of in that class that the memory bandwidth will be somewhat similar. However, if it is faster than a 480 and 580, having less memory bandwidth may actually hurt this card. Another interesting bit, they did not confirm the codename variant, so we don't know for sure that it's Navi 14 at this particular point in time. We do know, however, that this is a 158mm square die, so this is much smaller than that of the Navi 10, so this kind of lines up to what we were expecting from Navi 14. To me, this is really one of the big things here is the performance per watt compared to the RX 480. The RX 480 was decently power efficient. It wasn't in line with NVIDIA at the time, but if we have a 1.6 times performance per watt increase, that'd be pretty good. While this is just marketing here, we don't really know what its total power draw would be, but somewhere around half of an RX 480, I could see that happening, and that would bring it right in line around that 75 watt TDP mark. This is also the reason why I think they're making this a mobile chip, because 75 watts, RX 580-ish level performance, which we'll see here in just a second, that's pretty good. I mean, that would make sense for that $700-800 laptop range and deliver pretty good performance. The GPU will support 1408 stream processors or 22 compute units, and boost clocks will be lower than the 1845 of the 5700. Well, no kidding. They're going to go for power efficiency, so more than likely, I would see this card between 1500, somewhere around 1500 on the base, and probably somewhere around 1700, 1750 on boost, because once again, this is obviously going to be a power efficient card, not pure performance. AMD promises the RX 5500 will be available this quarter, but no date was given, and neither was pricing. Now, this is kind of the big deal right here. Since we don't know the price, it's very hard to judge this product, but we'll go through some basic numbers. Now, the base model of the RX 5500 will only have 4GB of GDDR6, which kind of makes sense when they're trying to compare it with the GTX 1650, which is also a 4GB card. Video cards pulled these numbers from AMD's slides, so once again, take these kind of with a grain of salt. These are essentially AMD's numbers, so of course they're going to want to show their card in the best light possible. And this is the test system right here, 3600X, 16 gigs of RAM, DDR4 3200. So if you were wondering, that's what they used to test this. All right, so the 5500 is actually coming out a good bit ahead of the RX 480, which hilariously enough still spanks the GTX 1650. This card's just crazy because faster than a 1050 Ti, but still slower than an RX 570. RX 570s are basically the same speed as the RX 480. So you can interchange this with an RX 570 if you like, and performance will be pretty similar. But we can see here you got 92 on Gears 5 versus 79. So that's actually a pretty good uplift. And I think going from basically an RX 570 to even a 580, which is about 10% faster, probably still be a little bit slower than this. So technically coming in a little bit faster than what I would expect an RX 580 to come in at, and same across the board. So we're looking at slightly better than RX 580. You can take a look at all the numbers here. I'll just kind of stop moving things so you can check that out for yourself. But overall, it looks like it's just going to be a titch faster than an RX 580 and probably only consume about 75 watts. That's good. That's actually really good because that's much stronger than the GTX 1650, which is NVIDIA's 75 watt offering at this point in time, making this really excellent for mobile graphics. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're actually making this card come out as quickly as possible. Now, as I mentioned in this video right here, AMD is having trouble with 7 nanometer, basically with not enough supply. This is quite evident by the fact that the 3950X has been pushed off, and the fact that you cannot buy a Ryzen 3900X at or near MSRP. So they're having issues fulfilling their commitments on the 7 nanometer process. However, the mobile market is something that AMD really needs to get into, as that's a vastly growing market, and they don't really have any offerings other than APUs that anybody really wants to use. Now, something like the RX 5500, once again, if it's at 75 watts or possibly even lower for the mobile variant, delivering RX 580 level performance, which today is actually superior to that of the GTX 1060 6GB. And if they come out with 8GB variants for mobile, which they probably will, I can see this selling very, very well. And they could charge a pretty good premium for those mobile graphics, as the GTX 1650 just really isn't that good. And more likely, this is going to be competing with the GTX 1660 more often than the GTX 1650. As for the desktop users out there, this is where it gets really kind of sketchy because pricing is unknown. There's really no way to gauge how good of a product this may or may not be. And it's ultimately going to come down to whether or not AMD wants to price this competitively with the GTX 1650, which I think they will, considering they themselves are comparing this to the 1650. So the $150 price point range, I think that would be okay. Especially when you consider you can get used RX 570s for about $80 with 4 gigs of RAM, and you can get RX 580 8GB for about $125, $130. Typically on the secondhand market. Now, for the new market, these cards go for about $129 for the 570, and then about $180 for the 8GB RX 580s. So that means this card would be slightly faster than the 580 and slightly cheaper and have slightly less memory. So I think that that's a pretty fair trade-off and would be pretty competitive with NVIDIA's GTX 1650 offering. Now, NVIDIA could lower prices, but we know that they never do that. So overall on the desktop, I think that this would be pretty good, especially if they can get them in like small form factor, low profile sizes. I think that this could be a very versatile chip for AMD. The big problem is, like I said, they're hitting capacity issues with 7 nanometer. And is it really worth developing these really small, but not quite as small as Zen chiplet die, because those Zen chiplets are far more valuable than these. Now, regaining market share in the mobile market, in the laptop market, I think that might be worth it to AMD, and that's probably the reason why we're seeing this product come out now instead of a bigger die and a bigger GPU, which just simply does not make sense for AMD at this point in time. They really need to focus in on their CPU market, and focusing in on laptops in the form of discrete graphics is a pretty good option, especially since anything slower than a GTX 1660 Ti, which consumes a lot more power than 75 watts, that's really its only competition. So I can see this product doing pretty well in the markets that it's trying to target. Ultimately, it comes down to price point and availability. If they can get this out before the holiday season in enough volume, especially in laptops, I think a lot of people would be very happy with that. There's not going to be a reference model, so they're waiting on AIBs. They do mention that in this article. Links will be in the description below, so you can check that out for yourself. So those are my two real concerns, pricing and availability. If it's available and it's at a good price, like I said, at $150, they can even charge a little bit more than the $1650, maybe $160, like an extra $10 premium. It's definitely faster, considering the $1650, like I said, is slower than an RX 570, and this card appears to be faster than an RX 580, Probably still a little slower than a 590, somewhere in between that range, but you can call it like a RX 585 or something like that. If you want to think about it in terms of performance, that's what these numbers are showing here. And yeah, so power draw, we need to know how power efficient it is. When will it be out? How good's availability? What the price will be? But this looks like a reasonably strong offering. It's not what we were wanting to see as desktop and PC enthusiasts, but in the mobile market, which is something I'm really starting to look into, I could see this filling a nice little niche, because right now in laptop graphics, the only GPU that makes any sense for me to look at is the 1660 Ti, which is slightly faster than this. But if this was, let's say, $200 less than the 1660 Ti in the laptops, that might be a decent offering, because realistically, my RX 580 is all I really need. So for most 1080p gamers, that's probably still going to be good enough for the next few years for most people. So really interested to see what they do with this. We'll see what kind of designs come out. But let me know what you guys think about this down in the comment section below. If you like this video, please hit that like button. Please subscribe. Please share with friends. That really does help me out. And that's all I have for today. And I will catch you guys in the next video.